New movie recording. No, whoops. Wait, I'm sorry, I'm already recording my screen. That's why that option wasn't up here. Okay, we're good. Okay, perfect. So, in case you couldn't see before, I took this that we had right before break, and I duplicated it, and I sort of reverted it back to that first thing we had written a little while ago. So, when you go to /characters, as opposed to /characters then an ID, we're going to do this query, and it's an any. So what we're going to do when we go to /characters in our app is we're going to see all the characters. But if we append an ID to the URL, we're going to get just the one character with that ID. Whoops. I meant to type 2, and there's Jake. Okay.
Good old Jake.
Good old Jake. All right. So, sessions, authentication, and authorization. So right now, when you visit this app, and you hit this URL or this URL, those are public. Anybody can reach them. What if I wanted to say, you have to be a user that's known to me before I let you access some of this data? This is where authentication comes in. Once a user is authenticated, I don't want them to have to re-authenticate for every request, because by default, HTTP, the underlying thing that makes up the web here, this thing that we're making requests and getting responses with, is stateless. So it doesn't remember one connection from another. There's nothing built into HTTP that does that. So what we invented was a way to do that with something called cookies, where you set some data in the header, and the server looks and says, oh yeah, the user who has that cookie, I've seen them before, I know who they are, and remembers them. Express sort of has a library to encapsulate all of that behavior for us, so we really don't have to think about the cookie, or what's in the cookie, or how the cookies work. We can just look at the session and just, in our code, say, hey, app.session, request.session, what's the data that's in this session? And the data that's in there will be different for Crystal than it will be for Cody, because they have two different cookies, right? And under the hood, Express Session will see them as two different users. Any data that goes into the session will be different for them. One of the most common things that we do with sessions is when a user logs in, we save which user it was that logged in into their session, so that for every other request in the app that requires the user to be logged in before they can access it, you can write some code that looks in the session, validates that the user that's in the session is a user in the app, and then goes ahead and lets them do the thing. That's authentication. So I don't think I'm going to code up the sessions example into this in authentication, but let me pull up Express Session. Express Session is on NPM, and I'm going to go to their GitHub page here. Ooh. And here's an example of configuring it. These are all kind of obtuse examples. There we go. Here's a good one. So we've set up Express to use sessions. We've set the secret to be keyboard cat. Remember, I think when we first talked about sessions the other day, there was those other two options, and somebody asked what they were for, and I said, I don't know. I bet you don't even have to provide them. This example here tells me that I don't. right? Because they're not here. It does have the max age for the cookie though, which means that after, and I can only assume that this is in milliseconds. Maybe it's even seconds. I don't know. Whatever time frame that is. After the cookie has not been updated for that long, the cookie will expire and it won't be valid anymore. So if the user comes back to the site, that cookie is valid, the session's invalidated, they get a new one. So that's why, like, maybe you put something in your cart on a website, right? And then you come back to the website a month later and you have nothing in your cart. That's because the cookie probably expired, right? You can put a really, really, really long time, like hundreds of years in here, and effectively the cookie will never expire, not lifetimes. So, depending on what you're using the session for, you may change this or not, right? A lot of times sessions just last as long as the browser stays open, and when you quit the browser and reopen it, then they're gone. That's also a way you can do it. Anyway, so we set up the session. We use this as the secret key to encode the session with, so that the user can't tamper with it. So as long as the user doesn't know that the key is keyboard cat, which is a terrible key to use. I think that they put that there because if they put one that was a good one, then people would probably just copy paste it as an example and not want to change it. Although, if I see keyboard cat there, I look at that and I think I should probably change that, right? But if I saw like 36 random numbers and letters there, I'd be like, I'm too lazy to come up with 36 of my own random numbers and letters. So, I don't fault them for putting keyboard cat in that example because it encourages them to change it. So now that that's configured, in here, inside the function for the request, on the request object, we can look at something called session. We have this because we told the app to use the session feature, and this is just an object. We can put any properties we want onto that object now, right? So if we say, we check to see if it has a property called views. If this property hasn't been defined yet, then we set it to be the value 1, and then we end the response by sending this text out. I imagine res.end is the same thing as res.send. The new one to me. Anyway, otherwise, if this has been set to 1 previously, so if this has been set to something, we just increment that number. And then we write back to the view. This is a little shorthand way of rendering a template right in the controller action. It would be better probably to have a mustache template, but that's a little too complex for this example. So they just say render. So instead of saying request.send and then putting this line and this line in one string, they can write multiple strings to the response and then end it, and that sends it. So I guess that answers my question about what request.end does. Cool. So that's really all sessions are. Sessions are just a way to have a little object, and I think there's a size limit to them. And if you're running a server, you probably want to impose a size limit and a time limit. Otherwise, the drive on your server will just get filled up with sessions. If they never expire, then they will never get deleted from the server. I've actually had servers in production that after a year or two, like all of a sudden, like the app is crashing and nobody knows why, and the hard drive is full. And I'm like, why is the hard drive full? This server doesn't even like have any data on it other than the data that was always in the database. It's just people visiting the website. And then I was like, oh, like my sessions were set to never expire. So I literally had years and years and years and years worth of sessions in whatever mechanism the server that you're using stores them. This express session library, I don't know how it stores them. Actually, I do. I think it's in memory. So you would actually run out of memory if you never expired them. Although I'm sure they would just expire old ones for you, rotate them out as the memory filled up. I'm going to guess that's what they do. I'm going to hope that's what they do, but that's a reasonable thing you would do in this case. But not all session stores work in memory, because what if the app restarts, right? You don't want to invalidate somebody's session just because your app had to restart when you deployed a code change, because that would be, imagine if every time you opened up Slack, randomly it logged you out. That would feel terrible to have to log back into all your Slack teams every time you opened it, right? When you open up Slack, you may not know this, but that is a that app that's running when you're running the Slack desktop client. That's essentially the Slack website running in a app that looks like a browser, but it's not a browser. It's an app that is a browser, but doesn't look like a browser. It's the same frame that Atom uses. It's a project called Electron that basically runs a Node.js process with a little web server that serves up some HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So that's what Slack is. So Slack is basically just a web app when you're using it in the desktop app. So when you open it up, it goes and it makes a request to Slack server to say like, hey, give me all the new messages that I've gotten since last time I was logged in. But let's say the Slack team had deployed an update to their server. If that reset all of the sessions, then every time they did that and you opened up Slack, you would be logged out of Slack. In fact, you could just be using it and then they deployed a change and now you're logged out. Just like, boop, like, oh, like my session's been invalidated. That would suck. So a production session store in a real world app would persist sessions to disk so that when the app restarts, it would reload them back up and they'd be available. You might put them in a database instead. All they are is just whatever data each user has for their cookie, you need to store that somewhere. And when I say you need to, I mean whatever library you're managing to do sessions, because it's very unlikely you will ever actually write all of that stuff yourself, right? You just get to say, use sessions, and then in here I magically have a session object that I can use, and it's the same user, or at least their same web browser. If that person opens up Firefox on their computer when they're using Chrome, they'll have a new session for Firefox. They'll get a separate cookie for that one. Because it's the browser itself stores that cookie. That's how cookies work. That's also why some people don't like cookies. Or like, oh, disable cookies in your browser for security stuff or whatever. That's because that's one of the ways that websites track you as you visit their websites, is by dropping a cookie on your computer. And when you come back, they're like, yep, seen you before, tracking your shopping habits. Right? You might go to one website. How many people have ever been like on Amazon and you're like, ooh, I'm looking for this shiny sequin top, to wear to the party this weekend. And then later on, you're like, I'm over here doing work stuff on this work website and I'm seeing advertisements at work for shiny sequin tops. Boy, that's weird, right? Like, how did they know? That's where cookies come in. When you visited the one website and the other, there's a third-party service that, as their business model, they provide a little, sometimes it's an image, sometimes it's a JavaScript file, whatever it is, and they tell this retail store and then this website that wants to get paid, like maybe they're offering you something free, like, I don't know, email or a forum, right? Like for fans of Transformers, I don't know. And the webmasters want to get paid for running that website, but it's free to the users, so they need to show ads. So this company that's in the middle says, okay, you embed this script and you embed this script, right? And then when you visit this website and you visited this website, you had the same cookie when you visited here and when you visited here, because the script that you embedded came from this same third person in the middle, right? So if you go and visit any website and then go in your dev tools and look at all the cookies you've got set and look at the domains that those cookies come from, unless you've got ad block stuff turned on, you probably have 20 or 30 different websites, different domain names that have cookies just for that one website you're visiting. So anytime you visit other websites that also use those services, they're going to know that you were here and you were here, right? And that's where the privacy concerns come in about maybe disabling cookies. Or this is a common kind of halfway, instead of disabling them altogether, disable ones that come from domains that aren't the website that I'm currently on, right? So that might be a way you can not break the website, but block, and that's how most ad blockers work, right? Or ghostery and stuff like that, is they also know all of those third-party services. So examples of those third-party services I'm talking about, Google. Google's the big one. Like, where does Google make all their money? How many people have ever actually, unless you've advertised with Google, how many people have ever actually given Google money for anything? Right? No hands. How many people use Google services? Like, a lot. Everyone, right? So Google must be getting paid for that, right? You're not Google's customer. You are literally their product. So by using Google's products, the customer-facing products, you become their product when they look at advertisers who want to advertise on websites. And so all the user agreements that you scroll past and accept when you're like, yep, this all sounds good. What you're basically saying is, it's okay for you to quasi-anonymously, it's not really, track all of my things that I do and behaviors, and to take that data and like munch it together and sell it to advertisers so they can advertise, to me. I'm like, maybe get some feels about that. Personally, I don't mind, because I'd rather get ads for things that are relevant to me than like shiny sequin tops for the party this weekend. Like, I'm not interested in that, right? That thought came to mind because my wife bought a shiny sequin top for this weekend, and it came too late, so she was already on the plane when it came, and she was sad, and she's going to send it back because she's mad at Amazon now. Anyway.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
A couple days I was looking at said that Internet Explorer doesn't support max age, but they all support the expiry dates.
Yes.
So should we stay away from the max age deal?
That's a good question. I don't know.
It's in seconds, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, it is. That's in seconds. Okay, so it's 60,000 seconds. So whatever that is, that's not 60 hours. That's like a couple years, probably, right? Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. You probably use a combination of both and cover your bases. Because the difference between max age and expire date is you would have to calculate what date you wanted the cookie to expire on, as opposed to just saying 6 months. Just 6 months from every time you refresh. Instead, you would have to periodically update the date on the cookie, or rather than letting it expire. So it's like a different answer to the same question. So I don't know. I didn't know that. So it's probably not a big deal. In fact, whatever the default is, if you don't change it, is probably a good default. So, anyone else have any kind of questions about? Oh, so we talked about sessions a little bit.
That's all that we would really need to put into.
That's it. That's it.
It's great because I had asked the people on Friday, and we ended up changing like 15 lines of code.
Now, to do what it is you want to do with the session might be more involved. But to actually just use the session, there's not much more to it. It's just an object that you can put data on, and you can assume that if the same user revisits the page with the same browser and the same cookie, that same data that you put in there for that user will be there. So I think it was Yana who had a question about how do I know that it's working? So I'm using it, the website still works, everything seems fine. How do I know that like things are getting stored in my session? Open up the website in a different browser. So y'all are probably using Chrome, the majority of you. I use Opera as my day-to-day browser. I might pop open Chrome. I've got Chrome Canary installed. I could get Firefox. I have 2 other versions of Opera installed, Opera Developer and Opera Neon. Almost forgot about Safari. right? All of these you could open it up in, and each one of them would get their own session, and they would have different data in them. Also, you could just, in the browser you're in, instead of pressing Command N to open a new window, if you press Shift Command N, it opens up a new private window, which has a different color bar right there to let you know that you're in a private window. Also see the little cool spy glasses up there. Or you can just go to File, New Private Window. So everything that you do in this window is going to have totally different sessions than the other browser window that you had. So if I go to the same website here, so right, if I go to Reddit up here, I'm going to be logged in, right? There's me on Reddit. If I open up my private window and I go to Reddit, my session's not going to exist. I'm not logged in. I get a login prompt and I get the default front page, which is dumb and uninformative and boring, or cool, whatever. I don't care. So I might test out something in a private tab to make sure I've got a brand new fresh session. And then as soon as you close this window, it destroys everything. Like all of your cookies, browser history, all of it is gone. So if I open it again and go back, it'll be a brand new session again. That's the whole purpose of the private window. Yep, it just opens a new browser window in privacy mode, or you can just go to new private window. Should be the exact same thing in Chrome as it is in Opera and Firefox.
But I remember when Gavin had to give out like the number so we could all like try it out. I don't know if you were
Yes.
was.
Yes.
It's like, because if I go into like different like Safari, I mean all right now I have like localhost 3000.
That's going to be stay the same. So the number that Gavin gave you all was instead of localhost, which is a magic name that says like, I don't know what my IP address is on the network, but go to it. That's what localhost means. Localhost is like me, this computer on the network.
Right.
If you have the actual IP address, I can give somebody else, because if I try to give you localhost and you try to connect to it, it's just going to connect to your computer on localhost, not mine. But if I figure out what my IP address is on the network, I can give you that, and when you connect, it'll connect to my computer, and you'll have your own session on it, which will be different from Bree's session, which will be different from Justin's session.
Well, because part of the assignment was that like multiple people can play at the same time, and that's what sessions do.
Yes. Yes.
All right.
So in your Hangman game, the variables that would have been globally like just as variables, like maybe I have an array called guesses where it stores all the users' guesses, and I just said like let guesses equal empty array up at the top of my file. That's not going to work anymore if you want to use sessions. You're going to have to store the guesses on the session. So it'll be request.session.guesses, because now the guesses are going to be different for each user that visits rather than one variable that's the same for my entire program. Yes, and replace them with accessing the property on sessions. We'll look at it. So the last thing I wanted to hit on here, and I think this is an important distinction to understand, and that a lot of people don't get this right away, so I'm going to make sure we talk about it. Oops, where's my list? Here is authorization versus authentication. Those are two words that are very similar in spelling and in meaning, but there is a very important distinction between what they mean. It's sort of like font and typeface. Like, sometimes we use them interchangeably, but they are two very different, distinct things. Authentication is the process of saying, hi, I'm Jason, right? Like, I'm going to log in. Here's my username and password. I have authenticated myself. From there, what does the application allow me to do? We were just looking at Reddit, so I'll use Reddit as an example. So now that I've authenticated, let me post a new post to a subreddit. Cool. Like, Yeah, any user that's authenticated is authorized to do that. However, I can't just go delete somebody else's subreddit, right? I'm not the mod of that subreddit, right? So that's where authorization comes in. Now that you've been authenticated, what are you authorized to do, right? I don't want to see the private messages of another user. I only want to see mine. So there will be code that is authorization code on the server that says, okay, the user's been authenticated. Let me get the messages that they're authorized to see, which will be different than the messages another user is authorized to see. So when we're talking about that side of it, that's what authorization is. Authentication is just a question of, is this the user who they say they are, right? So they're two related concepts, but the words mean something specific each. Although occasionally you'll see people use the words interchangeably, that's what they mean separate from each other. Cool. Event listeners in Node. Cool. Who came on that? Like, what were you working on that came up in?
I'm not going to do with buttons because I like to be different.
Okay, so that would have been not in Node. That would have been in the browser. Okay, cool. Because the DOM has this API of event listeners where any node on the page, there's certain types of events that can happen on them, and you can choose to listen for them and respond to them. When you say event listeners in Node, I thought we were talking about outside of the browser JavaScript, like in our Express app. There is event stuff that you can do in Node. It's a little more advanced, and it's not anything that we're going to cover right now. So I thought maybe you were getting at that. So I was like, whoa, like, what rabbit hole were you spelunking in that didn't cover that? Event emitters, that's exactly, yeah. Yes. It's cool, but it's a little scary and a little difficult to get around. Basically, it's the thing that the DOM does. You say, like, here's an event that you can listen to, and when that event happens, call that. You can make your own events that do that on any kind of object in Node using event emitters. So that means, like, when you click on a button in the browser, you didn't write code that says, hey, event the click event, emit the click event. That's built into the browser, right? But in Node, if you wanted to do something like that, like have a custom event happen, like, hey, when the user logs in, emit a login event, and anywhere else in the application, maybe I want to write code that gets called anytime a user logs in, I'm going to listen for that event. And so you have to use the event emitter to emit that event. That's a whole, like, maybe in many years I've had to deal with event emitter stuff like 3 times ever. So it's definitely not like month one stuff. Unless you're trying to do something very specific that requires it, we can dive into it. Did you have a specific question with event listeners in the browser?
Yeah, basically I've got all these buttons on my page. And
So,
I just wanted to return the value that's assigned to them.
Yes.
To be used, and I couldn't get it to do that because I think the asynchronous states don't do that.
Yeah. When I work on the front end part of this API we're building, I'll swing back around to that. Can I assume that you were maybe, instead of typing in like A, B, C, D, you wanted to have buttons for the alphabet? Beautiful. Like, that's how I would have set up that assignment if I had made it from scratch. In fact, I've assigned Hangman as an assignment, and I don't say make a text input, I say have buttons. And then when you click the button, rather than listing out, like, these are the things you've guessed before, and just disable the button.
That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, it's not too much different than what you're doing. In fact, we could even do, without changing the backend from typing in a form and hitting submit and enter, we could make it so that rather than using event listeners, we just make each button a submit button in its own form that submits that letter to the server, and then when you render in your template, you just render the button disabled if that button is included in the guesses.
That's it.
Yeah. Oh, my throat. Okay, well, we'll circle back around on that. So, Maria Lauda's question about functions built into JS and where to find them. So this just kind of comes from experience. Like once you see it, you'll be like, oh, that's cool. And then hopefully you remember that there's something like that. So even if you can't remember what it's called, maybe you want to go look like, oh, there was a thing that if I called it on arrays, I got a string back with everything pushed together, but I can't remember what it was called. I do that a lot. Or I remember what it was called in one programming language, but I can't remember what it's called in another programming language. So the answer to like every question is always MDN, right? So references, I could just use Google, but I am going to web technologies. Where's JavaScript? HTML and CSS. Come on, where's JavaScript? JavaScript. Here we go. Guide, references, built-in objects. So here's all of the different types that are built into JavaScript. It seems like a lot, but really, let's see, which ones do we use? We see undefined. There's these functions that we use a little bit, parseInt and parseFloat. Null, we use that. I'm scrolling past a bunch of stuff that we never use directly. We use strings a lot. Regular expressions, we use a little bit. Promises, we talked about that a little bit. Numbers, we use numbers a lot. We use JSON and math a little bit, and NaN. Right? We use dates and booleans and arrays. Right? That was really only about 10 things. So the vast majority of that list is all going to be stuff that like is used more internally by those other things and used less directly by us in our day-to-day code writing. So you don't have to be intimidated like, I don't know JavaScript because I don't know personally what half those things do. I can guess about a couple of them, but I've never had to touch them. Right? Actually, I think I do know what all of these things are, now that I'm actually reading them. Yeah. Anyway, so I'm going to go to the array, and here we have, these are the properties that arrays have. They have a length, and they also have something called a prototype. Every object in JavaScript has a prototype property, so ignore that. Now here are all the methods that arrays have. So the way this is written is that the array class itself has these three methods. So you can make an array from something else. So if you have an object that's like an array, and you call array.from and then pass it, you'll get back an array. But these are the methods, the ones that are on the prototype. These are the things that you can call on an array. So every array has these methods on it. So we know about filter, right? We know about find. We know about, I can assume what find index does. It's probably just like find, but instead of returning the value, it returns the index. Index of is a little bit different. Index of says, I'm just going to give you this value, and you're going to give me back the index where that value appears in the array. Find index says, I'm going to give you a function, and you're going to call that function for everything in the array, and then the thing that returns true for, you're going to give me back that index. So it's like, if my question for finding the thing was a little bit different than like, let's say I don't have the thing, I just know something about it. I want to find the one where something is true for, that's where I would use find index instead of index of. Does that answer, who was that? It sounded like Dayon. Yes, okay, there it is. Does that make sense?
No. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Basically, you would use that in a function.
Yeah, so let's say I had an array of fruit names, and I wanted to find out what position orange was at.
Okay.
Right? I know orange. That's a known thing to me. So I would say, fruits.index of orange, and I would get back 2, right? Because it's in the tooth, in the third position, right? That's great. What if I didn't know what orange was? Orange is the thing I wanted, right? So if I use find, I give it a function, and maybe it's maybe the user has a favorite fruit. So I'd write a function that says return the one who is equal to the user's favorite fruit, right? So I don't have the value itself. I'm looking for the value, and in my function, I can write whatever code I want, and I just return true. So the difference between find and find index is find will give me orange. Find index, given the same function, will give me 2.
Okay.
So if what I wanted was the index and find index didn't exist, I would have to do a find and then take what I get back from that and do an index of. Yeah, find index just lets me do that thing. Yes, Maria.
So
Maria.
it's getting a little more clear. So my question is, arrays have more methods because they're more manageable than like objects?
Arrays are more of a specific tool than objects. Arrays are a very specific thing, right? And there's a bunch of very specific kinds of things I'll do with arrays. Objects are more like stem cells, right? I can do all sorts of things with objects. I can put all kinds of data on them. I can do whatever I want with them. But what can they do themselves? Not a lot, right? They have the potential to become big things. In fact, and some of you may remember this, an array is just a type of object.
Yeah.
Yeah. So objects are sort of like this base, like gelatinous goo that I can shape into anything. An array is a very specific tool that comes with a bunch of very specific things it can do.
So if I had an object and I wanted to find something in my object, how would I do that?
Well, it would just have properties on it.
Yeah,
And,
but
but you say you didn't know what the keys were or the
Yeah.
values were?
Yeah.
I'll show you that in a sec. So here's the array. These are all the things I can do with an array, right? So the thing that she had seen was join, I think it was. So if I click on join, it'll take me to the page for join. And here's an example of how to use join. I have an array. I call join on it. It joins them together with commas by default. But if I specify a separator, it'll use that separator instead. That's it, right? And you can keep looking down this list here for all those different things that you can do on arrays or strings, right? If I go back here to this list, standard built-in objects, and I find string. But Maria was asking about object, so let's go to object. This list is much shorter than the list for arrays. It's also much more generic in these things that it can do. Up here, these aren't functions that each object has. This is functions, you call them literally by saying object.entries, and you pass an object into it. So if you do that, you're going to get back all of the values that are on that object, right? There's another one, object.keys. Here it is right there. If I call object.keys and I give it an object, so here's an object, right? It's got these keys and these values. If I say object.keys and I give it that object, I'm going to get back an array of just the key names. Now I can loop over this and find and do all the things that are on my object.
That's that short-minded of what I can actually do. When we're doing like the hangman, I don't really know if I should start with a string and convert the string to something, or just like I don't really know how to manage with the extent of, should I use a string? Should I cut it? Should I use an object? I don't really know how much or how to manage different things.
I think what you do is, start with what the value already is that's coming in, right? So if it's input from the user, it's probably a string. Until I need it to be something else, I'm just going to keep it as a string, right? Let's say I need to keep a list of them. That sounds like an array, right? Let's say it's not really just a list of things in order, but it's a bunch of different values that are related to each other. Then I might put them together as an object with keys and values, right? So it depends on what the problem is, which tool is more appropriate. And choosing that will just come with experience. Cool. All right. Perfect. Can do a short break, or I can just push till 12. Right. It's my people.
Jason, that's great.
That kind of do, but I also kind of want this to be over. So, not that I'm not enjoying my time with you all. I just have a pounding headache and my throat is swelling, and I'm starting to sweat profusely.
Do you need a break?
No, I will be fine. What's that? If you have ibuprofen, that would be amazing.
How many do you want?
2, if they're like 200 milligrams.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to do
3, actually. 3. Thank you. Yes. No, I have tea. Sorry, I have tea. I'm good. Thank you. All right. Cool. I appreciate it. Thank you. Okay. So we built this little server that I can ask for all of the characters and that I can ask for one character's info, right? What we're going to do is let's actually do this. Let's select ID and name from characters, right? So when we go to the list of characters here, we get back just a summary, like a table of contents, and we do this. Notice, and we're going to talk about this more tomorrow, that the URL is the same. We're talking about characters, and we're just adding an ID on. And so we have this idea of a collection and then a member of that collection, and the URL is the same other than the ID. Remember that idea. That's an important idea. There's a name for that idea, and we're going to talk about it in more detail tomorrow. So that's not an arbitrary choice. That's a very common pattern that we're going to follow. So we're done with the back end for now. Okay? If I want to set up static in here, and then serve some static assets for the front end from the public folder, I can do that. That's common and it's fine in a project. My personal style is to set up a totally separate project for front end assets, and I keep them separate. Gary, you have a question?
If you're done, can you commit that?
Yes, I will totally commit that right now. Boop, boop. Great. I'm on hub create and git push origin master. So it's QA87 on my GitHub. Great names we're coming up with today. All right. So I'm going to back up a directory, and I'm going to make a folder called QA87FE. Wow. And okay. So I have a little project generator that's going to generate for me an HTML file, CSS file. Also, the browser sync stuff will be all set up. So I'm going to use that. So let's open this up. So in another tab, I'm going to go back here, and I should have left it running. I'm going to start my server. I'm not planning on changing anything in this server, so I'm just going to run node instead of nodemon. So my server's running, right? If we go to localhost 3000, we get JSON responses back to our requests. So what I'm going to do over in here is start this guy up. And browser sync is smart enough. It defaults to port 3002, but it's smart enough if 3000 is in use, it goes to 3001. Cool. So here's our hello world. And I'm going to pop in over here. Now, everything that I do in this project, I could just as easily have done in the public folder of my node project and set up static assets to serve them. And as long as the URLs for my assets didn't conflict with the routes that I made in my server file, we wouldn't have any problems. We could do that honky-dory all day. It's a workflow choice for me that I like them to be separate. In a big production app, a lot of times your application server, like your Node.js thing, it might get deployed to a service like Heroku or something like that. Or it might... No, there's some dudes. They're just kind of moseying about. Anyway, did they mosey out?
Yeah.
Okay. Tony on it? Okay. Totally lost my train of thought. Oh, right. So in a production environment, my Node.js server needs to run on a server somewhere like performant and that runs my code. However, my static assets, the HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, those don't need to run on a fancy application server. They can run on a server that literally just serves up the files, right? We talked about CDNs a little bit. If I had a really big website that was going to get a ton of traffic, I don't want an application server that I need to be spending its time looking up things in the database and doing complicated stuff. I don't want it wasting time serving requests for static assets, right? Like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, images. So I'm going to set up dedicated servers for those. So in a big production situation, I need to separate my front end from my back end anyways. So as a developer, I make the choice to just start and work that way anyway. So I've got my back end running here, and I've got my front end temporary developer server running here to do live reloading of my changes. When I'm done with it, I'm still just going to have static assets that get copied to a server somewhere, right? But this is my application server for my backend. Okay. Cool. So what we want to do is make it so that there is a list of all the characters on this page, and maybe when I click on one, it's going to take me to a page that will load the details for a character, or maybe I'll show it in a little modal window, like a little pop-up. How's that sound? That sounds better. Let's do that. Too bad this isn't going to be React, because I'd probably be done already. Okay. So let's make a main.js. It's gonna go a little outside the territory I wanna cover for now. Soon, yes. So I'm gonna say adventure time, right? I'm gonna make an unordered list here, and what I'm gonna do here is have a list to character.html and the name of a character. So let's say Finn the human, and Jake the dog. So this is what I ultimately want, right? And there it is. It's not pretty. Although if I come over here, maybe I can just borrow some CSS real fast. Oh, fun. Okay, here it is. Oh, never mind. That's not going to be so easy. CSS modules and stuff. All right, we'll worry about that later. I might circle back to it. So let's do this sidebar and then have a detail area where we'll render the details if we have one. I like that. Real easy. Okay. Let me close this. Did I? Oh, I was going to try to borrow the CSS from this other website, but I realized something about this. It's not going to copy one-to-one, so we're going to forget about that. And I'm going back to this. So what I want to have happen is when I click on one of these, I'm going to show the details for that character down below. Right? So we're going to have down here a details div. So dot details. Oops. There we go. Okay. So and then an image tag, right? So this is what it's going to look like when let's make this an H2. Okay. So this is what it's. If we were taking this all the way, this is the point where I'd spend some time working on the CSS and make it look good. But this is the result, right, of what we want. But we don't have this data, and we don't have this data, right? So we're going to use JavaScript to fill those in. So this is kind of going back to a couple weeks ago when we were focusing on the front-end side of things. Now we learned about how to set up the Express server, and we've got our own little API server. So now we're gonna use that. So let me make a script source and pull in our main.js file. I'm gonna go ahead and put it at the bottom of the file, just so I can make things a little easier on myself. Okay, so let's test that it's working. So I'm gonna say alert hey. There, it alerted hey over there. Cool. So, if you can ask, what was that? What was that thing I just did? Oh, okay. Oh yeah, prompt has an input on the. Prompt and alert are terrible things. Don't use them. Like, they're great for testing something or playing around. Don't use them in a real app. They're so obnoxious. Okay. So, what I need to do is make a fetch to localhost 3. Sup, Dan? Alright, so let's say we make this fetch request. Rutrow, cores, oh my god, are you kidding me? Okay. I hate cores. So we actually bumped into this a couple weeks ago. Let's talk about it real fast. So the browser is not going to fetch an AJAX request from this localhost 3000 because it's from a different origin than the one that my front end is on, which is localhost 3001. So what you need to do is set something up in your backend server that says, yes, other domains are allowed to access me with AJAX calls. So I'm going to hope that I can just express cores and find a quick solution here.
Node.js cores middleware.
Why is that a thing?
It's a security thing. It's trying to stop cross-site scripting attacks. Where did I tell that MySpace story to y'all?
No.
Did I mention that there was a MySpace story at some point? Okay. I did a nasty thing a long time ago with a cross-site scripting attack that would have been harder to do without if cores had existed at the time. It stops some JavaScript code on my page from accessing data on another server unless that server explicitly allows it. So real fast, let's put this in place. So I'm going to. It takes a little while. It's a good 20-minute story. You all will get the story, I promise. So I've done this. Let's go back to. Let's go back to that back end here. My server, where's that file? Okay, server. So const cores is equal to, whoops, not cores, const cores. So cores is an abbreviation for cross-origin request script, I think.
You misspelled const.
Thank you. And I just need to say app.useCores, really? Is that just gonna enable all cores requests? Perfect. So there are other options you can specify where you can limit, like, yes, I'm gonna allow cores requests, but only from the servers where I've deployed my front-end assets to, right? But in this case, anything's fine. Anything goes. So I just had to add that. What that does is it puts special headers in my requests that tell the browser, you're allowed to do this. It's actually a browser-enforced thing, not a thing. There's Chrome extensions you can install that will make it so that you can do cores requests without having the server supporting it. But as I think somebody, was it Sandra? I think you had or maybe it was Lydia, had an extension in the beginning that disabled cores and it broke websites. Yeah. Whoops, I don't need to run that again. So let's start our server back up. We request. Perfect. So now we just got a 404 not found. Our cores message went away. I can be done with this and this and this. So it wasn't this, it was /characters, right? So I've just done a fetch for /characters in my JavaScript. Let me get my split view going back on. Cool, so nothing's in my console. I'm gonna look in my network tab. I see all these different things here, right? If I click on characters, here was my actual fetch request, right? There's even the response. Right, there's a preview of the response as a JSON object there. Cool, and look, you can see that access control allow origin star. That's that cores crap that we just set up to allow that to work. Anyway, the cores stuff is totally hand wavy. Just know that the server that you're making requests to needs to have it enabled. Done. Right? Don't worry about the implementation of it. So I'm fetching, but I'm not doing anything with the response, right? So I'm going to say .then. So this is the response. I'm going to make code a little smaller here. So then I can return response.json. Then I'll actually get the data, and I can console.log it. Cool. Yes, we are getting the data from our back end. In our front end code, our browser is going to, rather than having the back end render this HTML page, our front end is going to render the page by getting the data from the back end. Yes.
So this is like the fetch, like the iTunes music, where you would actually go fetch out like to another web server. But this is actually fetching to our web server.
Yes, that's exactly right. In case you didn't hear what Garrett said in the back, he said this is like the iTunes assignment that we did, but instead of going out and fetching to the iTunes server for their API, we're fetching from our own API with our own data. So if I run this now, we can see that it fetches that data and then it logs the data out. I don't want to log the data out, right? What I want to do is document.create element. I want to create a list item tag. Whoops. Let's see, the li is that. I want to say li. I want to set the text content to be, sorry, I want to do this for each thing in the data, right? Because it's an array. Let's say character. What?
With your package, how do you do that arrow with your
So I use a custom set of snippets, and it's just F tab for me. If you're using my snippet package, which I think some of you are, it's just F tab. Okay. So character here, now that I'm inside of this loop where I'm looping through this array, character is one of those objects. So I'm going to put its name as the text content. And then I'm going to say ul.append child li. And the ul doesn't exist yet, so let's get a reference to it. Const ul is document dot query selector. I'm just going to find the first ul on the page. Whoop whoop. So this data came from our back end, right? So if we go over here, let's add Princess Bubblegum. We refresh, there she is, right? So we've gone full round trip from the database all the way to having static front-end assets that we wrote here that we can deploy. They're just HTML and JavaScript and CSS, but we're dynamically getting stuff out of the database. But our front end here doesn't know about the database. It just knows about the API we created, right? What is funny?
It's much easier. I understand.
This is the right here. This is the pinnacle, the culmination of all the back end stuff we've been doing and all the front end stuff we've been doing. This is where the two meet, right here. Yeah. So if you've been wondering why we did all that front end stuff and then why we did all that back end stuff, that was it, right there. Right? And then if you were in the React thing, how many people came to the React talk last week? About more than half, actually. That's awesome. What you'll see is that doing all of this business with the document, create element, alive, and blah, 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 done. Right? Not even. Don't even have to do that. Right? It gets even easier.
What's the point of templates now?
So what if my page had a whole lot more? Well, let's add the links, right? Let's make const anchor tag is document dot create element. We're gonna make an anchor tag. We're gonna set the text content of the anchor tag to be the name. Then we're going to put the anchor tag into the A. We also need to set the A, its href attribute to be character.html question mark ID equals character.id. So let's say we have this. So now I want to look at this, inspect it. So there was the href for that one, that one. All that code I just had to add, just to add one more tag to the structure. What if I was building out something much more complex than that? I would never want to write out all of this by hand for something more complex. So templates on the back end, less useful if I'm doing this, but I would use a templating language on the front end instead of this. In fact, we're going to do that for the details. I'm going to show you a mini version using template literals, which are a new feature of JavaScript. Before that, to do what I'm going to show you, you would have had to use something like Mustache. So now what I want to do is when I click on one of these, I don't actually want to go to that page. That was kind of my older line of thinking. What I'm going to do is when I click on one, I'm going to render the details down here on the bottom. So I'm actually going to get rid of this href, and I'm just going to make it so that when you click on the A, so I'm going to say a dot add event listener, click. We're going to, here's the function. Let's just console.log the character when we click on them. Like, these are my baby steps, right? This is where I'm checking that what I just wrote works. That's not what I'm not ultimately going to console log the character, but let me make sure my event listener works before I keep writing more code. Oops. Let me pull this up here. So if I click Finn the Human, there's Finn the Human, there's Princess Bubblegum, there's Jake the Dog. Great. So instead what I would rather do is I'm going to call a function called getCharacterDetails, and I'm going to pass just the ID of the character to that. Okay? So this function doesn't exist yet. Let's make it exist. I want to write it at the top. It takes an ID as an argument, right? So let's move our console.log up to here and just log the ID when we click. See if that works. Beautiful. That works great. So let's do this, right? Let's fetch this URL. I'm going to pass the ID to that URL. Then, and this is all pretty standard right here, res. I'm going to do the shorthand version here. All right, I didn't do the shorthand version here. Let's bring that to fruition. Also, we can get rid of the parentheses because it's one argument. Okay. Then, with the data, and get rid of that there too. So let's just console.log the data now. Wow, got all the data for Finn the Human, all the data for Jake the Dog, all the data for Princess Bubblegum. So each time we clicked on one of these, it made a separate request to our API using the ID in the URL. So that first request, when the page loaded, hit this API endpoint. Then each time we click on a link, we go get this one with the rest of the details. So let's take that and let's make a template. And we're going to use a template literal string, so backticks. And if we remember over here, I'm going to hit undo a few times, and I'm going to copy paste that, and I'm going to close all this spec up. And there we go. Okay. So I copy pasted this template. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say const details is document dot query. Watch this. Query selector dot details right? I'm going to say details dot. I can't use text content. Watch what happens if I use text content. Just going to put that template in there. It looks like that. That's not what I wanted to do, right? I wanted to set the inner HTML to be this HTML here. I didn't want it to interpret that as text. I wanted it to interpret it as HTML code. There we go. So let's replace this with data.name. Replace this with data.bio. And let's replace this with data.image. There's Jake the dog. There's Finn the human. All right, so we're going to walk back through it all. Those, name, bio, and image. So let's real fast. Let's
And we could maybe also.
Yep. Okay. Okay, it's up there. Okay, so let's walk back through this code. I'm going to take this right here. No, that's fine. Okay. So here's all the code that makes this happen.
So the page loads, right? The HTML page is mostly empty, but it's got a couple tags we care about. It has a UL tag, and it has a div with the class details. So we're going to get a reference to them, we're going to save them for later. Then we declare a function. This code doesn't run right now, it's just a function that we can call later. Then this code's not in a function, so this code's going to run right now. So we make a fetch to characters. This is our backend server that we wrote. That responds with a JSON answer, so we parse the JSON. Then once we've got the JSON parsed into a JavaScript object, that's what we have as data now. It's an array, so we're going to for each over it. So each object in that array represents a character. The fields that are on there were the ones that we rendered in our from our query in the backend server. It was just the ID and the name. So I make a list item, I make an anchor tag, I put the anchor tag in the list item with the text content of the character's name. And then I add an event listener. So this kind of gets to what Sean was talking about, right? I make an event listener on that A tag. I listen for a click, and I just give it a function that's going to get called when you click on this A tag. It's going to call that function we declared earlier and pass that character's ID to it. Right? So when I click on that, it's going to call, if I click on Finn the human, it's going to call get character details, and it's going to pass 1 to this function. So up here, ID will be 1 when I click Finn the human. ID will be 2 when I click Jake the dog. So when you click that and this function gets called, we'll make another fetch to the server, but this time we'll append the ID to the URL. Then we'll parse the JSON, and when we get back, we have a JavaScript object. We're not going to do a for each with the data because, remember for those, it was just one object, not an array that came back. So the object that came back has the keys name, bio, and image on it, right? We can verify that by going to localhost 3000/character/1 and seeing it. So I make it, this is just a template string, a template literal, just plain backtick string in JavaScript. And I'm writing some HTML into it. It looks a lot like mustache templates, right? The nice thing is we got this feature in JavaScript because of templating languages like mustache and stuff like that being so ubiquitous. They kind of added a feature to do this a little bit easier than just plussing a bunch of strings together, which is how you would have had to have done it before you had templating language. So what I end up with is a string that says bracket h2 end bracket fin the human end h2, right? These values get replaced. Remember, inside this in the template literal, you can just write some JavaScript code. So I'm just accessing my data.name, so I've got that variable that has that object on it. And I interpolate those in here. So then I just have a string that looks like some HTML. If I just say details.text content and I set it to be that, then I'm just setting the text that looks like HTML into there. That doesn't actually work like it did when we did here with just text content. But DOM nodes have this property called inner HTML, and if you set them to be a string, it interprets that string as actual like HTML code, and it parses it, and it basically does this for you. So instead of saying document.create element h2, document.create element p, document.create element image, and then appending all the children to details, I just set the inner HTML to be that string. So it's a shorter way of doing this. Yes?
I don't know if it was reading or one of the instructors, but they told us there's some vulnerabilities with inner HTML.
It's not a perfect solution. It works great in a little simple case like this. It can be abused. You generally wouldn't want to do like data that comes from the user. Same thing with SQL injection. There's similar kind of issues with doing that. There could be performance issues with doing that. In a real world application, then you're not just doing something small like this. You would be using a framework like React or Angular or Vue or etc. to do this instead, right? So this is I wouldn't do this with vanilla JavaScript for anything much bigger than this. I would switch to another library that would solve the problems with inner HTML by not using it. Cool. Any questions about how the front end and the back end have come together now? It's a good halfway point to be at, right? You what?
Mostly just like exact.
Nice. Cool. So let me do another. Did I change anything since the last commit? Nope. Okay. Cool. 12:03. Damn, how's that for timing?